Great. All right. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. Please take a look at your Zoom box and check out your name. We'd love to see your name and organization. And as well, if you want to come on camera, we'd love to see your face as well. Here is a link, I'll put it in the chat as well, to where we will post the recording for this meeting and the materials for this meeting, along with other engagement materials from the past bit when we've been engaging on this new centralized application process. So I'll go ahead and drop that in the chat momentarily, and this information will be posted in the next couple of days. As we get started here, and as folks are still coming in the room, I did want to just do a quick acknowledgement of process agreements that we use at OHCS to help foster an inclusive environment. And we practice these in our staff meetings, and interested to practice with you as well and make sure that people feel comfortable to share input during this meeting, and we can foster an inclusive environment. So thanks for practicing those with us. And by the way, my name is Kim Travis. Sorry that I didn't introduce myself earlier. I'm a facilitator here today, and I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator for the Affordable Rental Housing Division. Again, thanks for joining and welcome. Share with you how we're going to spend our time today and why we're meeting here today. We're really interested in making sure that we keep you up to date on where we are with proposed recommendations for the new centralized application process, and highlight input we've received in previous sessions from you. We've had robust engagement over the past 6 or 8 months, and we want to make sure that you know that we're hearing you and we value your input, and we're incorporating your input where we can as we're making these changes. Also, we want to make sure you're up to date and share information about upcoming engagements and additional discussions on this topic. So we'll cover those things today and leave plenty of time for Q&A. If you do want to ask a question, feel free to raise your hand. You can also use the chat function as well. We have some information that we're going to be sharing with you, and then we will have dedicated time for Q&A, but please feel free to jump in as needed for your clarifying questions. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and move to a slide that looks familiar for those who have been tracking this engagement process. Essentially, we are looking to make changes with the way we've currently been running NOFAs, which is having everything fall in this step right here, where we would be opening up a solicitation and putting our criteria out in a NOFA, and then opening up the solicitation, getting applications in, and we're reviewing and scoring materials, but are very limited in what we're allowed to talk with you about with the projects, because we're in a formal solicitation and a NOFA competitive process. So we're deconstructing that previous NOFA process into earlier engagement on projects, where we're talking with you about your project concept, and we're working through an intake process, and able to able to have an opportunity to talk with you at the initial stages, and give some input and feedback and guidance to help you through the additional steps of the process in order to meet impact assessment and financial eligibility, and then get to a final project commitment 6 months or so prior to the financial closing for the project. So knowing that projects have different timelines associated with them, all kinds of unique circumstances involved with projects. So looking to be able to have more interaction with you to look at the unique circumstances with your projects and develop realistic timelines and milestones, and then assist you as we move through the process with you. So that's what we've been collecting a lot of input on, having lots of meetings for those who may be new to this conversation. And so today we're going to get an update from Natasha and then take some time to answer your questions, knowing that you likely have a lot of questions and we may not be able to answer all of them today, but we'll be working our best to, take your questions and develop answers and responses to your questions and input as we're able to. Okay, I think with that, I'm going to turn it over to Natasha, but maybe stop sharing my screen for a second and see who's in the room, if we've got folks on camera. Hi, Natasha.
Hi, nice to see you and
Yeah.
to see everybody else here today. Thanks again for taking time to check in with us today. I think as Kim has been referencing, we just are really appreciative of your time and expertise, providing input and guidance into this whole transition and informing all of the recommendations that we are pivoting to and to work through, both through Housing Stability Council, but also to implement to really align and support with production. I think this has been extensive engagement, so much input. It is really forming for us guiding principles to be able to move, kind of answer strategic questions as we go through, and I think continue to be interested in your thoughts and also your questions, and I think that those understanding the questions and being able to respond to them, whether we are able to respond and have time and the answers in hand to do so today, as well as we'll be working to make sure that we are continuing to seek answers to all of the questions that you are asking. And so that is a continued effort here. And again, in all earnestness, engaging to really seek your input, make sure that we can be responsive in balancing all of the disparate needs and feedback. Not all feedback is homogeneous, and so there's a lot of diversity of opinions in lots of different areas, which I think becomes clear as you dig in on all of the information that we have been tracking and doing our best to share back. And so I think some of what we're covering today is really kind of preview, really digging in a little bit deeper on materials that are being recommended to Housing Stability Council, but also, signaling a bunch of different directions. But overall, I think as we're pulling together all of the input and thinking about how are we synthesizing this, I think identified this, set of 5 values that felt really critical for, informing decisions and informing recommendations at this point in time. Firstly is we are under an executive order on production, and that executive order is established in response to the critical need for housing across the state, for bringing new units online and also into affordable housing space. And so in that vein, from a production need, wherever possible, we should be aligning resources to support bringing new affordable housing units to serve and Oregonians and meet the need. We need to embed equity and racial justice to disrupt impacts of systems that have prevented access to resources and serve to not support BIPOC populations. We should have predictable and available resources. I think resource clarity and availability has been a resonant theme throughout our engagement, that the best way to get the new units is to have clear resources and not and minimize the hurdles and the um, timing challenges of one-time offering types of resources. And I think with no small reflection on legislative investment, we have tremendous resources for production, largely through Article 11Q bonds, and And I think that gives us an opportunity to literally put out more resources in one biennia than we have had the ability to do in the past, but also have those resources available to put out through a standards-based review process versus a competitive structure. So I think that is really exciting and important um, to really lead and guide through this change process. We need to make sure that we are incorporating we are tenant centered, both for building design, but also funding strategies. Um, what do what do tenants need to be successful? What do our statewide network of local nonprofits and housing authorities offer to tenants from a housing stability and supports perspective, and as a key place of wanting to make sure that we're prioritizing investment for an overall infrastructure for development, operation, and service provision. And so I'll stop talking there. And then also, of course, we should serve the state. We shouldn't focus our resources in just one area. We want to make sure that we are spreading resources where we see need across the state, and also intentionally offset impacts of historic lack of investment. And so I think, Kim, if we can then transition to the next slide, and that's funny, I'm moving my mouse as though I'm doing it. Looking at those values, thinking about how that translates into our resources, and I think this is what we would have ordinarily called our funding calendar. It's a little bit less of a calendar these days because it's a year open resources. But I think looking at how do those values inform decision making around these, and very clearly alignment with the executive order, where we should be using our resources to support production of affordable housing units. We should be dedicating tribal resources and reflection both of production needs in tribal communities, but also from a perspective of equity and racial justice, tenant-centered design, and having predictable available resources. And then we should be making sure that we're implementing those same standards of access and opportunity when we're looking at our dedicated resource lines, which exist for permanent supportive housing through the PSH initiative resources, veterans, which is statutory set aside within our general housing account program, the GHAP program, and then the new legislative investment of agricultural workforce funding, which is really exciting to incorporate into there. And then on the preservation side, wanting to make sure that we are building off of the critical work that has been done under Michael Parker's work with the Preservation Steering Committee and many, many others, to understand and identify how it is we want to be moving forward with preservation investments, and then extending that also to include not only risk of loss from physical, financial, or expiries, but also through manufactured park preservation and acquisition of naturally occurring affordable housing that exists in manufactured dwelling parks that have tremendous pressures from the market that risks that loss of housing. I think we can go to the next slide. And so, so I think translating those values, that direction over into our resource offering, we have identified here, this is the update detail of our resource offering. I think we've heard, questions that, this is incorporating lift and home together, and agree that this is pushing, in terms of like what is general development resources. This is home resources that would be dedicated to general development, not further specified under that umbrella. And it is true that there are absolutely impacts to the federal resources in terms of from a process side, choice limiting actions and others. And so we are navigating that from a process perspective internally, really trying to define and understand that line where as soon as there's a potential that you would be accessing those resources, that's when choice limiting actions really is triggered. I think our overall concept is to pretty early identify the lane of resources that is the best fit for projects so that we can be navigating that responsibly, not wanting to apply all of those federal HUD standards to all projects regardless, knowing that those do both have time and cost impacts. And so, again, the idea is that we would be targeting to kind of identification of that really early in collaboration with the development partner. And the vast majority of those resources in that $320 million bucket are Article 11 coupons. So I think that is where it is. And again, we'll be practicing that process as projects are going through an intake process and presumably very early in that review process. I think the additional detail here that has been added since the last time you saw this is that in alignment with the preservation framework and the work that Michael has been leading, that $40 million resources for preservation capital, we are recommending $30 million for physical and financial risk of loss, and then $10 million for projects with federal-based rent assistance risk of loss. And there's a lot of analysis of both what we know our needs in this biennia as well as a values-based alignment with the preservation framework. Manufactured park preservation, we have increased that from $5 million to $10 million in this recommendation, really pulling that additional $5 million into the whole resource pool to go. That $5 million was added to in the preservation rental, but the impact of that additional increase of 5 is a reduction to some resources that we were holding with the hopes of being able to address funding gaps. But we are still holding some resources to do that. But we'll be unpacking with the in probably in next month's conversation with Housing Stability Council, some consideration for how that might be approached, which will inform the amount at the end of the day. In any case, $10 million for manufactured park preservation, and I think then we have $30 million dedicated for tribal investments, noting that is both based on real long-term relationship development and feedback when working with tribes about needing to have dedicated resources lines, and also acknowledging that Article 11 coupons are not possible to be invested in tribal trust land. So it's really critical that we hold resources to serve tribal communities. Again, we have that veteran dedicated resources and the new ag worker housing dedicated capital as well. This year, we do not have 4% tax credits or 9% credits to offer. We do have our ongoing resources of the ag housing tax credit or the OAHTC program. Do the next slide. And then, as referencing earlier, we have that TBD amount for last gap resources. We'll be putting out some information around that shortly. And then portfolio stabilization. This was a framework that we had stood up, I think last year, and is really intentionally to align with our asset management work, to have a toolkit of resources to be able to support projects that are, that need some financial remedy as part of a solvent to have long-term success and not have to have comprehensive refinancing and all of that. So I think it's should be a toolkit. We'll be sharing more about that in the coming weeks as well. Identifying $3 million of our GHAP capacity resources to go to capacity investments to support production. We have our land acquisition program. There's a note in there. We were able to repurpose $10 million to add into that land acquisition program funds. So that will continue to exist. That has been a really effective tool in being able to hold property across the state and it is repaid, and so it recycles. And so I think that's a really exciting kind of foundational program to have. And we are standing up our new pre-development resources, which I am also hoping becomes another great foundation um, for our development pipeline. And Becky is just reminding me that that $10 million does also include land acquisition for home ownership development. And so that is across the spectrum of that those program investments. And those are, I think, they're held for a period of 1 year. Yeah, thank you, Becky. And so we will have that continue to serve the state as well. And then anything that's not subscribed in 2024 will roll into 2025. You know, we'll have be adding tax credits, are hoping to have more, you know, pull LIFT and GHAP resources to pair with tax credits, as well as to continue to work without. And I think one of the things that I don't think we've dug into in this space is the potential for federal reform of the 50% test for 4% low-income housing tax credits. If that is Greek to you, that is okay. There is, much awaited, and we will see what happens at the federal level reform that would essentially let us be able to let us fund more projects with 4% tax credits. If or when that passes, we will need to roll out an update strategy. I think the latest drafts that we have seen from the federal federal legislature is really around a short window, a 2-year window for a reduction in the 50% test to 30%. And so we know that we will need to act swiftly, and we'll continue to work on what that could look like, and also make sure that we are communicating as soon as anything is moving. And I think let's pause there, as Kim was saying in the chat, if there's any questions around that. We also have Mitch here, if there's any questions on the pre-development. We will be presenting the pre-development framework, which has been in this engagement space several times, as well as at Housing Stability Council before. So we'll be presenting that framework for adoption so that we can continue to finalize that program development. So I'll pause here and stop talking so that anybody can ask questions.
Feel free to raise your hand or drop it in the chat. We're going to move on to set asides in a second here, but just wanted to make sure that folks have information about the resource offerings. So feel free to jump in. Just pause for a sec. Will there be an opportunity for engagement around the proposed subsidy limits that were shared at Housing Stability Council?
Yes, I was gonna chat about this a little later, but I'll pick it up here. Thanks, Sarah. I think we have gotten a lot of, so just to regroup everybody, I shared at Housing Stability Council it's like an initial concept around approaching subsidy limit and cost controls, really wanting to make sure that as we navigate out of the competitive space for resources, we have a broader picture of tools that can build confidence around resource use and prioritizing public subsidy, including all of these resources. And part of that overall picture is the subsidy limits. And we then also circulated a survey. I have a lot of information from folks that in the survey, and we are digging through that to come up with our next reflection back. I am hopeful that in the next couple weeks we have the next look of that information. I don't have it now. Again, I've received it. If you have other information that you'd like to add into the mix, I think certainly feel free to reach out to, either Kim or I, to be able to send us any of your thoughts on that if you hadn't been able to put them into the survey. But so yeah, so I think mid next month, I'm hopeful that we'll be able to share an update on that. I think they, heard strongly from many partners around concern that they were too low, and certainly don't completely override the need for tax credit equity. I think I also heard from many who found many workable deals. So I think it's trying to understand and really dig into the details. A lot of you sent a lot of details. So we're processing through all of that, and intend that that will be something that I'm bringing to our April Housing Stability Council meeting, and ideally sharing with all of you in advance of that to see what additional thoughts you have.
Okay, thank you for that, Natasha. And I got a couple hands here, Lydia and then Shelley, and then we're gonna move on to set aside recommendations here momentarily.
Yeah, I had just had a question, thinking about when you're sharing the resources for 2024, and then obviously the look ahead to 2025, but a lot of unknowns about the exact dollar amounts. Like conceptually, and shifting to the central funding process, I'm just trying to understand if you kind of envision like this intake process resetting every year, or if a project that comes in 2024, maybe, we set our expectation of timeline and then there's additional gap that's available next year. Like, will that project still be able to access those additional resources? Or is it you come in 2024 and the resources that are available this year are, matched to projects, and then you'd have to come resubmit next year, if that makes sense?
Yeah, that's a great framing question. And I think it is like very much trying to understand as we switch our hats out of that competitive NOSFA space into this centralized application process. And I think the intake process is, I think, perennial, right? So it is, as you are entering it in, I think that's where we're going to have visibility of what this really early pipeline and I think is. And I think, with that, the idea that we will see projects at different levels of baked, and you might come in saying, this is on my desk and this is, at this step. And then perhaps you decide, okay, we're getting close to actually submitting something, like let's start baking that out. And so I don't think that you will need to resubmit that as a function to be able to access the application stages. I do think I wanted to be really committed to having, and I know the team is really working hard to figure out how we can have a dashboard of resources so that there's clear tracking and understanding where there are resources committed and in what stage of that resource commitment. And I don't believe that we'll be making commitments to projects that we don't have resources for. And so I think in some fundamental way that starts to change the dynamic a bit, in that we're not going to ask you to submit a complete application at a time when we're not going to have resources to put funding to that project. At the same time, we want to be supporting you as you're doing that early work to have everything, get all of your ducks lined up to be able to do so once resources become available. Again, this is, I think, part of what we're trying to, like, what will this look like, as we have not experienced this centralized application offering in decades, and certainly not with these types of resources available on its face. This is, again, more resources than we have ever offered at one time. And so it feels on the one hand, like we shouldn't be immediately tapped out of resources. At the other hand, I think we don't have the landscape. We don't have everybody's intake application to really have those all comprehensive picture to build. But and I'll reflect, I think it's later in the application, but I think one of the first things that we will be opening is that intake process, so that we can start building that understanding before applications start happening and being real, so that we can make sure that we're seeing where we need to put in a strategy or of some sort.
Thanks.
Great question. Shelley?
Yeah, regarding the subsidy limits, I guess I want you to consider, again, in rural areas, there are not other resources to tap into. And because you're going away from actual competitive kind of scoring, and it appears there's going to be a little bit more communication, give and take with organ housing staff, that you basically don't really set limits, that it's just worked through when you get to number 3 and you're working on your underwriting, and maybe then we're getting good estimates from contractors. Because right now, for example, we submitted our estimates for like our 9% in November, and it's already coming to April and we've not heard anything. So things can change in those 5 to 6 months, versus if you allow us to show documentation of a good estimate when you're in 3, when we're close to getting a commitment and a closing, then maybe those costs won't fluctuate as much, and you won't have the situations where people do end up with cost overruns or, supply chain issues and stuff. That the determination is based on you looking at what we're providing you, versus having a set limit where we can't get other resources from other communities.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Shelley. And I think, I think we need to strike a balance of accountability to our legislature around, what units they expect to get from the dollars, but also the reality of the market dynamics and the volatility and those, the longer window we have between a funding reservation and closing, the more vulnerable to shifts and change projects are. And so I think an intentional impact of this update is to get that final funding commitment much closer to that closing, so there's less exposure risk, and balancing that accountability and, with needing to be responsive. And so really trying to strike the balance of that. And I think that's where I'm trying to focus from the cost control perspective on building other ways at being able to assess the reasonability. And I think, reasonability is so nuanced. And so we want to make sure that we're putting in good policies to make sure that on, from a kind of I'm saying accountability, but there's another word that I think I want to use instead, and I can't think of it. But from an accountability perspective, saying that we have done the diligence that we need as public funders, but and also are empowering development community with some resource certainty, so that you're understanding what resources can be available to be able to do that work.
Just a quick follow-up, because I think there was also some pointing in regards to how many 3 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms and 1 bedrooms. I'm hoping you go a little bit away from that. Like, for example, we have a commitment for project-based Section 8 vouchers. So we're really looking to the Housing Authority to show us their wait list on what their needs are. Maybe they, if they've targeted seniors where they want some 1s and 2s, and those were always lower scored. So I'm wondering if you're going to get away from that and let us provide you information on what we think the community in our conversations needs.
Yeah, and I think that is a difference and a distinction with this. I think that is a theme I have heard over the years around resources, and that when we are aligning full NOFAs to be able to focus on large bedroom sized units, then you are left building 3-bedroom units when your market study says you need 1-bedroom units. And I think that that is not what we're wanting to do now. I think we want you to be responsive to market. I think the initial subsidy, that draft subsidy limits we put out for to kind of get input and understanding is indicated as different, higher subsidy aligned with how large the bedroom sizes are. And so there's more, so it's not from a point perspective, but it is from a dollar. So a 1-bedroom unit would have higher subsidy than a studio, and down that line. And I think from the survey, overall, I was just looking at the data. We had scaled the subsidy both by what AMI are you serving in your unit, so higher subsidy for 30% units than 60% units, and then higher subsidy for 3 bedrooms than 2 bedrooms. And From the survey results, it looks like pretty solid alignment with thinking that those are important strategies. It's not 100% on the same page. Again, there's disparate opinions in all places, I think, but pretty overwhelmingly, good 3/4 of responses are saying that those are very important tools to be able, that serving lower income is more expensive. Obviously, it would mean we'd have less operating revenue to projects. And then larger bedroom sizes are more costly. So yes, I think that is an important part of being responsive to the market.
All
Thank you.
right, great questions. We're gonna move on to discuss set-aside recommendations. Then we'll come back and have opportunity for some more questions before we discuss next steps.
Awesome.
Natasha, did you get a chance to take a drink of water and
No,
gear up for this next section?
yeah, I'm remembering though what we're talking about next. So yeah, I think any one of these conversations we could spend the whole day on, and I also know that's a lot. Okay, so, and I guess we spend a lot of our day on it here. So the other part, so those were, what resources are being aligned to from a activity perspective. Set-asides is then how are we distributing those resources? And so I think I set up kind of two main things. One is respond to systems impacts of systemic inequity. And so translating both the values, again, those initial 5 values over to this from an equity and racial justice perspective, serving the state perspective, wanting to make sure that we establish a deliberate set aside for access by culturally specific organizations. And we've talked about that, I think, at our last conversation in this space, wanting to have in that definition explicit language around those are resourced partnerships in ownership, so not symbolic partnerships, but where that culturally specific organization is driving project forward. And then I think I neglected, I think we would need to strike out the word small in this. And so I think the other piece of that is geographic. And so wanting to look at making sure that we are serving rural communities with resources. So access for development by nonprofits in rural communities. And last time we talked about this, we were wondering, is it small nonprofits or is it in rural communities? And I think I think from, again, that principle perspective, those values that we were talking about earlier, from being tenant-centered and nonprofit organizations, and being a foundation of meeting tenant need and serving population, wanting to make sure that we're supporting both the development of rural communities, but also supporting nonprofits for doing that work. And then production statewide, and that translates into a regional set-asides as well. I think we can go to the next slide.
Yeah, I'm gonna pause for just a second because we did have a question in the chat. First about, kind of managing the pipeline, which I think we'll put a pin in that one and come back. But then on this topic, have you defined small, rural, and then if you strike small from the rural definition, are you expecting that the nonprofit is located in the rural community? So I know, and we have received lots of questions about the definitions associated with these set-asides. And we may not be able to answer these today. So I'm not sure, Natasha, how you want to address these questions right here.
Yeah, I think overall thinking that, from that value perspective, what is it that we're wanting to make sure that we are accomplishing? And so culturally specific organizations is an equity and racial justice response, also production and also serving tenants, but an equity and racial justice focus, and wanting to make sure that we are prioritizing resource access for those that are culturally specific organizations and are intentionally led by by BIPOC community and serving BIPOC community as a core element of their mission. And then the rural element is really largely focused on wanting to make sure there's been, historic lack of investment in rural communities, and then nonprofits as a foundation of that network. And so I think it is, striking the small, realizing that it's not, the response is not about wanting to grow lots of new small development organizations, but that the need is to invest in those rural communities through nonprofits that are doing so in a way that is building local capacity to support the work. And so I think there is still there within that a fair bit of nuance, but I think it would support nonprofit organizations that work in communities across the state. And in ways that are building community and building the systems to support tenants to thrive within those communities.
Okay.
And so I think that's that's where we are right now. Again, not it has not been finalized. We will be introducing this to Housing Stability Council this month, and we'll be seeking to finalize that at the April meeting. So there
Great.
will still be more discussion and before we put that pen down on that policy.
All right. So we'll move on to more data here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So translating those into function here, we are looking at organizational set aside of 25%. And again, and this is has the updated language in it. I'm sorry, Kim, I didn't catch that, that revision earlier. And then geographic set-asides. And in alignment with the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis, we've looked at a few different data elements over time. We brought those, I think, into this space. We also brought those to Housing Stability Council. The latest one was looking at that data on underproduction. And so, the two elements from the ONA were total need, underproduction. Housing Stability Council last month asked us to include a racialized element of need for housing. So our wonderful research team did a bunch of work on identifying different potential factors. What is presented here and will be brought back to Housing Stability Council on Friday is the housing burden for BIPOC households, the distribution of housing burden BIPOC households across the state. And this initial recommendation saying to give equal weight to both of those factors. And I think we can scroll to the next slide to see this is the unpacked region descriptor. So the eastern regions having 15%, which is approximately 61 million, metro 40%, and the western counties about 184 million. Any questions on that?
Okay. Very clear.
Yes.
Yeah, great. Okay, well, feel free to drop questions in the chat as well. The percentage of Willamette Valley. So that's in the western region.
Yeah. So it's rolled into, so it's the, if we're looking back at that map,
Correct. Oops.
yeah, we are. So these are the regions that were drafted into the ONA, the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis, which is legislative effort, and OHCS and DLCD work in that space. We are not allocating to each of those colored areas, but we are establishing 3 regions. So the Willamette Valley, that green area, is in western Oregon, so would be that 45% for that the yellow, green, and red on that map.
All right, any other questions about set-asides? All right.
Awesome.
I think we're shifting now to kind of some next steps and wrapping up, and still monitor the chat here. Oh, you want to detail and writing of the regions. Yeah, so we will be posting this presentation online after, and if you would like some more detail about the regions, feel free to email me and I can get you the information that you need. If you're looking for, which counties belong in the region, I'm happy to compile some information for you. So you can reach out directly to me and I can get that for you. A question about the idea of evaluating costs, reasonability, cost controls. Project costs vary widely and are dynamic, particularly across the state for different reasons.
Yeah, I'll just take a minute on it. I know I want to cover this content. I think the idea is, I think you're absolutely right, Ryan, that there are countless ways that each project is different. The nuance of where you are building, both geographically, but also within cities or within communities, and what does the land need? Are you building a tower that has a lot of underground? Like, there's so many elements of that are we understand that there's no one way to measure reasonability. And I think what we have, though, is previously in our NOFA process, where we were competing projects against each other, we were able to give points to subsidy, and that meant that there was public confidence from our legislature and others that we were putting into place policies that were ensuring we were investing in areas where we would get lower needs for subsidy. And I think there's plus minuses and all types of policies around that so that description is not fully sufficient. But I think conceptually, as we navigate into the centralized application process, we need to make sure that we are really being explicit about how we want to assess cost reasonability in a way that is responsive to projects and also gives us some explicit and named ways that we will be looking at it. And I think most certainly, having details of costs within the pro forma is one element, but also wanting to have some metrics for comparing things or understanding reasonability. We have been working, the state of Minnesota had implemented a predictive cost model, which they have been using to identify, as they have projects come through, what are the outliers that are showing some of the costs that are unexpected, and not with the idea that rules something out, that running against a model is going to rule something out, but more that it allows us to identify where do we want to focus time in evaluating, and where do we want to say, well, that's all looks like as one would predict the cost would be, that's what we're seeing. And so the bar for additional scrutiny should be lower. And so are seeking to incorporate those types of strategies. And then beyond that, obviously subsidy is impacted by the costs of projects, and we need to be responsive to market conditions, as Shelley was talking about earlier, where we have projects come in at one point in their diligence and in that moment of time, and then 6 months later, it looks different. So we want to make sure that we're being responsive to that. But again, we need to have ways to be evaluating and measuring as we go. And so I think that's all part of the landscape that we need to be creating. And I think we'll get there. And and that, it is a challenging conversation on the subsidy side when we see, especially where we have lack of tax credits to provide additional equity to put into the resource stack. And so I think those are all of the pieces that we're contending with, again, trying to process all of the input and have additional both local, regional conversations, but also national conversations around how other public funders are approaching these types of challenges. Okay, so then to round us out here, the other part that we haven't really brought back to the space yet is, as we navigate out of a NOFA competitive, where what you need to do is get try to outcompete each other to get the most points to be successful in receiving resources. We're wanting to do the standard-based review. So that means we need to incorporate some standards. What are the standards that we would have and hold you to as you go through? And this is, I'm planning to introduce more detail around this at our Housing Stability Council meeting this Friday. And I think our next engagement in this space will focus on bringing that information here as well, getting conversation and feedback, questions captured. I think overall we are, I think that there's a lot of really translation of existing thresholds into our new structure where, so it's, a lot of things will be familiar. A lot of things in, across all of the different NOFAs were slightly different. Sometimes we would look at square foot costs, some were unit costs, some were, so it's just those little variations. And so we need to create a consistent way that you will be presenting your information and having that information reviewed. The main categories that we are highlighting in that evaluation standards is capacity experience. We will have a pre-qualification process to provide information around what is your organizational experience, this capacity experience, looking at that total development team, making sure that you have the capacity to do participate in the project, building and location. And I think this is something that we've heard significant feedback around, where we are continually reevaluating the location of a project when our standards change. And so hoping to do that, we're, at that first impact assessment, and so one time, and it won't change after that initial review. And then looking at meeting tenant needs broadly and also within an equity or racial justice lens. What are the partnerships and resources for equity and racial justice? So within that, including culturally specific organizations or resource partnerships or resident services partnerships and others within their services broadly, including, and I think underneath a services umbrella is both resident services and then permanent supportive housing resources, and those would have different review process and level of detail that we're asking for. And then as is a traditional practice of financial standards and review process and underwriting guidelines across all of those. And so the idea is, again, that those will not be point driven to compete against each other, but instead establish standards for you to navigate as you are putting those projects. So as we're doing that individual review at the impact stage and at the financial assessment stage, we have some named standards that we would be evaluating to say, do you meet the standard or do you not?
All right. Thanks, Natasha.
Yeah.
We do have a couple questions in the chat. And I want to connect with Justin one-on-one to learn more about the work happening with connecting with community partners and resource groups. But looking at, we don't have a specific launch date, but a general idea of when we would start the process.
Yeah, I think if you want to go to the next slide, Kim.
Okay. Yeah.
Because
there are a few other questions, so I'll go
Yeah.
to the next slide and kind of talk about next steps too, and then we can come back and address some additional questions. Okay, great.
Yeah, absolutely. These are some great questions.
So as Natasha mentioned, we are bringing much of this information to the Housing Stability Council this upcoming Friday. So we will then get input at that forum and make refinements and changes as needed to go back to Housing Stability Council in April. We do have an engagement session on March 7th. So I will put the link in the chat where you can register for that, where we plan to focus our time on evaluation standards and dig into that topic that Natasha was just referring to. And we have 2 hours for that engagement session. I know many of you have said we haven't had enough time to to foster really great dialogue among participants and staff. So we have 2 hours. So that's great. And again, I'll put the link there in the chat so you can sign up for that. So that is our scheduled engagement session. And then, as I mentioned, back to Housing Stability Council at the April meeting to introduce, additional refinements to the recommendations. And then the Housing Stability Council will be reviewing and hopefully providing approval at their May 3rd meeting so that we can officially launch the project after we get that final approval. Anything additional?
Yeah. So I think this is thinking strategically, rolling all of this work both through Housing Stability Council, but also getting all of the documents finalized to be able to do that. And nothing is waiting for anything. We are actively working on all of the pieces. So I think at this point, looking to say that we would be launching that project intake process in April. Again, I think that is the place where we'll be able to get the landscape for the landscape for all of the project needs. I think, again, these are where we are trying to build our broad understanding of all of the projects on your desk. This is going to inform access to different resource pools, including pre-development where applicable. It will also can include things that are further out. They are not fully baked, but you might want to talk to a technical advisor around your efforts and your work. It will also anyway, so I think that is a foundational element, and I think have identified that it will be really critical for us to have that information before we do a cold opening of that project, of that application. We are also, and I'm hoping to spend a little time, we'll see how fast our time with council goes on Friday, but they have explicitly, and I think we've heard from development community as well, as wanting to have some testing processes in there, have balanced a lot of different strategies for doing so, one of which would be to have a soft opening of our application process so that we can kind of have some real projects, go through those, thinking we can, will likely be wanting to look at some more recent projects that have not been able to be successfully funded through NOFA, but we know have resolved the outstanding challenges and had otherwise met all of our thresholds. So I think there will be some strategies for that, which lets us continue to bring all of the rest of the information through Housing Stability Council to finalize, and then have the broad opening of all of the resources in May. I know we are pretty much at time. I do also see I guess you didn't say, Diana, that it was a question, but I think I think the timing and I think there's some, I guess, Darren as well, that how does this, where does readiness to proceed factor into all of this? And I think readiness to proceed is an aspect of each piece. And so the idea is that, when you're ready to have your to initiate the kind of project review, the first thing we'll look at are lots of the it's the impact assessment, but the services, the project design, the more people-based evaluation of your project, very high level financials, and then after meet that standards, and then would receive a conditional commitment, and the conditional commitment will include within it benchmarks that you need to make, would work with you to identify what the times of those benchmarks is. So that is the idea of that. What we're wanting to incentivize is continued progress and forward momentum on projects. So essentially it's in that process of being able to have conditional commitments that are benchmarked to moving projects forward. You won't be able to hold a conditional commitment for a year. You'd kind of identify when you will be able to be ready from a diligence perspective for that next financial review, and then refresh that conditional commitment to add in the next layer of diligence elements before that final funding commitment. I think those are kind of all of the pieces now. So I
Yeah.
don't know what's going on with the links, but
Yeah, sorry about that. I'm not exactly sure what is going on with that, but we'll send a technical advisory out so that you can, make sure you get the right link for that. And it is 2 hours. So I will work on whatever.
I think it's this. I think it's just keeps pasting the Zoom link. I'm just gonna, for anybody, right, it's just the engagement page that, oh, yeah. So if you go to that engagement page, there's a meeting registration link. So I think that'll do the trick.
Yes, I'm assuming that maybe because we are in process right now that Zoom is not cooperating with another meeting, a future meeting. So sorry about that technical difficulties there. If you ever have any issues with accessing any of the engagement materials or the link to the registration, feel free to reach out to me and we can troubleshoot. So with that, I want to thank Natasha for all the information that you provided today. I want to thank the participants for some great questions, really good dialogue. And we look forward to future discussions on the 7th. So please feel free again in the meantime to reach out if you need some additional information. With that, thank you all. And this will be posted on that general engagement resource page's website. So thanks,
Great. Thank
Natasha.
you all.
Thanks,
Yeah.
everyone.